Good evening, this is Occupier Kaylin coming to you live from Cessna Auditorium on the Drake University campus. In a few minutes, Bernie Sanders will be coming out. This place is filling up fast, so I had to really look for a spot that wasn't reserved yet, allow me to give you a good visual. So I managed to score a spot near the end of the front row, but at least get a good visual. I may not be able to give you what's on the screen very well, but nevertheless, I will be able to give you a good view, and I should still pick up good audio. But if I do have issues, please give me a yell in the chat. Then if I sound like I'm coming through a blender, or I keep looping on myself or whatever, just give me a yell in the chat, and then I'll stop the stream and restart it. As you can see, I just gave you a look around. The bottom is pretty much full. There are some spots that are being held for other people. And then the bird rows are starting to fill up. So this could be a packed house. Thanks. Good to know I'm looking good so far. O'Malley event was a couple weeks ago. That when he opened up his campaign office, I went and live streamed over there. But he did speak for about 20-25 minutes, and then he took questions. And it looks like they're set up for questions here with these mics.
Yeah.
Stand it because everybody else is. They're yelling, Bernie, Bernie, Bernie.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Mark Cooper, and I have the honor and the privilege this evening to introduce Senator Bernie Sanders. Yeah! Bernie Sanders is serving his second term in the U.S. Senate after winning re-election in 2012 with 71% of the vote. His previous 16 years in the House of Representatives make him the longest-serving independent member of Congress in American history. In 1981, he was elected by 10 votes to the first of 4 terms as mayor of Burlington. Sanders lectured at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and at Hamilton College in upstate New York, before his 1990 election as Vermont's at-large Congress member. The Almanac of American Politics calls Sanders a practical and successful legislator. Throughout his career, he has focused on the shrinking American middle class and the growing income and wealth gaps in the United States. Senator Sanders has been the nation's most persistent voice, defending the interests of the working class and standing up to the excess of corporate America. Yeah. Tenure in Congress on issues that affect the needs of the people that government often ignore: working families, the middle class, the elderly, children, and the poor. Senator Sanders, or Bernie as he's known to the people of Vermont, played a key role in making sure the Affordable Care Act that was signed into law substantially improves primarily health care in this country through a major expansion of federally qualified health centers. As chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, Sanders in 2014 passed legislation reforming the VA health care system. Congressional Quarterly said he was able to bridge Washington's toxic partisan divide and kept one of the most significant deals in years. Today, Sanders remains on the Veterans Committee and was tapped by the Senate leadership to be the ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee. He also serves on the Environment and the Energy Committees, where he has championed energy efficiency and sustainable energy development in the fight to curb dangerous greenhouse gas emissions. He has fought for greater access to affordable health care and improved education programs from pre-K to college. Now please, join me in giving a warm Des Moines, Iowa welcome to U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders.
Everybody's standing again, so they're yelling, Bernie, Bernie, Bernie.
Whoa, we've got a lot of people here tonight. Sometimes our campaign has been referred to as a fringe campaign. Well, this is fringe. I hate to see mainstream. Thank you all very much. let me start off by telling you something that no other candidate will tell you. And that is absolutely and positively, his campaign is not about Bernie Sanders. It is about you.
That's right.
Let me tell you something else. If we had the best president that you could possibly imagine,
That's you.
Someone yelled, "That's you."
Complete the sentence. No matter how good, hardworking, smart, honest that president could be, that president would accomplish nothing unless we had a vigorous, strong, mass grassroots movement, and that is what this campaign is about.
Yeah.
The truth of the matter is, and it's a painful truth, and I'm not particularly delighted to have to tell you this, but it is that the powers of the billionaire class, the power of Wall Street, the power of corporate America, power of the media, is so great that the only way we can bring about change, the only chance that we have, is when millions and millions of people get involved in a political revolution which says enough is enough. This country, our government, belongs to all of us and not a handful of billionaires. It's not only winning elections through a grassroots movement, it is making sure that we maintain that grassroots movement in perpetuity. Because the powers that be have got to look out their window and see a million young people there saying, you know what, we want free tuition in colleges and universities around the country. Unless people are engaged, unless political consciousness changes in this country. Now I'm going to say something maybe radical and controversial, but what happens in Washington and in your state capital is almost as important as football. I don't want to go too far. And what I mean by that, and what a revolution in consciousness is about, is beginning the process to engage our friends and our neighbors who are now completely disillusioned with the political process. They think everybody involved in politics is an idiot or a crook or worse. And your job is to explain to them, if politics is so irrelevant, it's so dumb, why did the Koch brothers spend $1 billion to elect their candidates? Now is not the time for thinking small. What thinking small is about is getting engaged in a debate about whether we cut funding for education by 3% or 6%. Liberals say, hey, only cut it by 3%. Conservatives say 6%. Don't get caught up in that type of debate. The United States of America today is the wealthiest country in the history of the world. In the last 2 years alone, the wealthiest 14 people in this country, 14 people, saw their wealth increase by $157 billion, which is more wealth that is owned by the bottom 130 million Americans. In other words, we are a wealthy enough country to think big, not small. We are a wealthy enough country to say that all of our people are entitled to a decent standard of living. time in the modern history of our country for working families to come together to revitalize American democracy. And that means not to have elections as we did last November when 63% of our people didn't vote and 80% of young people didn't vote. That is not the kind of democracy we believe in. What we have got to do is come together, revitalize American democracy, end the 40-year collapse of the American middle class, and make certain that all of our children and our grandchildren are able to enjoy a quality of life that brings them health, prosperity, security, and joy. And that once again makes our great country the leader in the world in the fight for economic and social justice, for environmental sanity, and for a world of peace. That is This country, in my view today, faces more serious problems than at any time since the Great Depression. And if you include the planetary crisis of climate change, it may well be that the challenges we face now are more dire than any time in our modern history. What I want to emphasize to you as strongly as I can is do not accept the media definition of what politics is about. For too many in the media, politics is like a baseball game. Who's winning, who's losing, how much money are people raising, or as a soap opera, what's happening to the personal lives of the candidates. That is not what politics is about. What politics is about in a democratic society is to discuss the serious problems facing our country, respect other people's point of view, and then have the resolve to address those issues. That's the public debate. What I want to do this evening is to just lay out some of the issues that I am going to be talking about during this campaign. I'm not going to touch on all of them, but I want to lay out some of the central issues. Today, in my mind, the most significant issue from a moral perspective, from a political perspective, and from an economic perspective is the grotesque level of wealth and income inequality in our country. Our country today has more income and wealth inequality than any major industrialized nation on earth, and it is worse today than at any time since 1929. The issue of wealth and income inequality touches on every other issue that we face. And let me be very clear. There is something profoundly wrong when the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. There is something profoundly wrong when today 99% of all new income is going to the top 1%. There is something profoundly wrong when in recent years we have seen a proliferation of millionaires and billionaires at the same time as we have by far the highest rate of childhood poverty of any major country on earth. Americans today are working longer hours for lower wages. and almost all of the new income and all of the new wealth is going to the people on top. This level, this grotesque level of income and wealth inequality is not only immoral, it is something that is not sustainable, and it is not what America is supposed to be about, and that is something that together we are going to change. This is a rigged economy. And this campaign is sending a message to the billionaire class, and that message is, you can't have it all. You can't get huge tax breaks when children in America are going hungry. Continue to send our jobs to China when millions of people are looking for work in this country. You can't hide your profits in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens while there are massive unmet needs in every corner of this country. You have got to start paying your fair share. Class, that cocky billionaire class, that class of arrogance that thinks they are entitled to it all, is that you cannot take advantage of all of the benefits of America if you refuse to accept your responsibility as Americans. Now is not just income and wealth inequality. It is not just that we have one family in America, the Walton family, that owns more wealth than the bottom 40%. It's not just that. It is the tragic reality, and we don't talk about this, that despite huge increases in technology, huge increases in worker productivity, that the middle class of our country, which was once the envy of the entire world, has been disappearing for 40 years. Today, median family income is almost $5,000 less than it was in 1999. You have men, you have women working longer hours for lower wages. In my state, and I'm sure it's not different here in Iowa, you have folks with 2 jobs, 3 jobs, trying to cobble together an income to sustain their family and maybe some health care benefits. The truth of the matter is that when we talk about unemployment, real unemployment is not the official 5.4% that you read about in the newspapers. If you include those people who have given up looking for work, and those many, many people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time, real unemployment in this country is close to 11%. And further, and this is something that we hear very little about, and that is the real horrendous crisis of youth unemployment. Just last week, the Economic Policy Institute, which is a very well-regarded economic think tank, they issued some numbers on what real youth unemployment is in this country. And this is what they said. If once again you include those people who are working part-time when they want to work full-time, if you include those people, young people who have given up looking for work, white high school graduates aged 17 to 20 have an unemployment rate of 33%. Hispanics in that same age group have an unemployment rate of 36%. African American young people have an unemployment rate of 51%.
Can you touch the shutter for me?
You know what that is saying to an entire generation of young people? Young people who want to leave their homes, go out, get jobs, be independent, get away from their families, start standing on their own feet. What we are saying to that generation is we could care less about you. And that is why Congressman John Conyers and I have recently reintroduced legislation for $5.5 billion that would create 1 million jobs for our young people throughout this country.
Yeah!
When we talk about the economy, the issue is not just income and wealth inequality, and the issue is not just a disappearing middle class. It is also the fact that millions of Americans today are now working for totally inadequate wages. Let us be very clear. The federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage and must be raised. Minimum wage must become a living wage, which means raising it over a few-year period to $15 an hour. Our goal must be that no one in this country who works 40 hours a week is living in poverty. A living wage should not only be fair, it should be equitable. That is why we must establish pay equity for women workers. It is indefensible that women in this country are making 78 cents on the dollar compared to what a man earns doing the same work. That is indefensible. That's got to change. And by the way, when we change that, we take a big bite out of poverty because we're putting money into the hands of women who in many cases need it the most. Touch on another issue related that I've been talking about during the last week. You know, many of my Republican colleagues talk a lot about, quote-unquote, family values.
Family values don't mean squat.
Family values is opposition to a woman's right to choose. What they mean by family values is opposition to a woman getting the contraception that she needs. What they mean by family values is strong opposition to gay rights. And on all of those issues, I strongly disagree. Here's the point. It's not enough for us to disagree with them. It is more important for us to begin to talk about what real family values are. If we are serious about family values and protecting the families of this country, the United States must end the international embarrassment of being the only major country on earth, the only one, which does not guarantee workers paid medical and family leave. We cannot major country on earth that does not guarantee paid sick time and paid vacation time. Last place is no place for America. That is why, as president of this country, I will fight for 12 weeks of paid family leave, at least 10 days of paid vacation time, and 7 days of paid sick time. What does that mean in English, in the real world? We have our Republican friends talking about family values. And yet, in recent years, there have been millions of women giving birth and unable to spend time with their newborn babies because they did not have the income and they had to go back to work. Family values is not telling a woman that she can't spend time with a baby because she does not have enough money. That is not a family value. A family value is not telling, it is not a family value to tell a mom or a dad that you can't stay home with your sick kid because you have no paid sick leave. It is not a family value or very, very intelligent to tell people who are working in the food industry that even if they are sick, they have got to get to work. Now, I don't know about you. About the idea of somebody who's pretty sick playing around with my food in a restaurant. And furthermore, an issue, again, that we very rarely talk about, almost never, and that is as a result of the collapse of the American middle class and as a result of declining wages, the American people are working today longer hours than the people of any other country. Did you know that? In other words, we are an extraordinarily hard-working people because as wages have gone down, as income has gone down, people need to work longer hours. That's a simple reality. Today in our country, we are working 137 hours a year, more than the Japanese, who are also very hard-working people. 260 hours a year more than the British, and almost 500 hours a year more than the French. We all know about those French.
6 weeks vacation a year.
Yeah.
We don't even get paid bereavement leave.
One day.
Here is
and
the
it's not
story.
paid.
This is really quite remarkable when you think about it. If you look at American history textbooks, you will see in the early part of the 20th century, 1910, 1915, workers marching in protest, and they held up these huge banners. You know what those banners said? Those banners said, "We want a 40-hour work week. We're not slaves. We're not beasts of burden. We want time to spend with our kids. We want some leisure activity. We want education. We don't want to have to work and work and work." This is rather amazing. But despite all of the new technology that makes every one of you more productive as a worker, we still have not reached the goal of a 40-hour work week. Incredible. This really is quite incredible. Today, 85% of working men and 66% of working women work more than 40 hours a week. And what is particularly painful about this is that we have millions of working people who receive zero or very little paid vacation time. So to me, you know what a family value is? A family value is that a husband and a wife and kids can spend a couple of weeks together on vacation. I don't think that's a value. Now, if we are serious about reversing the decline of the middle class, we need to focus on a four-letter word that is always what people say when we ask them their major concern. And that is, we need a major federal jobs program that puts millions of Americans back to work at decent paying jobs. How do we do it? What's the most effective way to create meaningful jobs? Well, everybody knows that our infrastructure in this country is collapsing. That's our roads, our bridges, our water systems, our rail system, our wastewater plants, levees and dams need an enormous amount of work. I've introduced legislation that would put $1 trillion over a 5-year period into making our country more productive, more efficient, and safer by rebuilding our infrastructure. And when we do that, we can create and save 13 million jobs, and that is exactly what we have to do. And when we talk about creating jobs and saving jobs, there is another issue out there. It's not a sexy issue. Media doesn't pay much attention to it, but it is enormously important. And that is to understand that our trade policies over the last 40 years, NAFTA, CAFTA, permanent normal trade relations with China, have been a disaster. Since 2001, we have lost some 60,000 factories in this country and millions of decent paying jobs. Trade is not the only reason for those losses, but it is a major reason. Now, I have some very good news to tell all of you this evening, if you have not already heard. The House of Representatives this morning put a real kibosh on the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Yeah. TPP, in my view, somebody was helpful, lead the other ones. The TPP is a continuation of these disastrous trade policies. It is supported by virtually every major corporation in America, by Wall Street, by the pharmaceutical industry. It is opposed by every trade union in this country, almost every environmental group in this country, and many religious organizations. And today, the good side won. That should make you all happy, campers.
And if we're serious about rebuilding our economy for the middle class, it is time to break up the largest financial institutions in this country. Wall Street cannot continue to be an island unto itself, gambling trillions in risky financial instruments while expecting the public to bail it out. We need a banking system that is part of a productive economy where money is lent out to small and medium-sized businesses, not a handful of huge banks that engage in reckless and illegal activities. If a bank is too big to fail, it is too big to exist.
I heard that.
brothers and sisters, let me tell you about another issue. And let me be as blunt as I can, while telling you in many respects what you already know. As a result of the disastrous Supreme Court decision in the Citizens United case, the American political system has become totally corrupted, and the foundations of American democracy are being undermined. What the Supreme Court essentially said was that it was not good enough for a handful of billionaires to own much of our economy. What the Supreme Court said is, now you can own the United States government as well. And that is precisely what they are trying to do right now. If we are serious about creating jobs, about climate change, about the needs of our kids, our veterans, and the elderly, we must be deadly serious about campaign finance reform, because all of these other issues. I have said it before, and I say it again. If elected president, I will not nominate any justice to the Supreme Court who is not prepared to be loud and clear in telling the American people that he or she will vote to overturn the Citizens United.
The McCutcheon decision after that is like Citizens United on steroids.
If we are serious, as I hope we are, about creating a vibrant democracy where anybody, no matter what their political point of view may be, who would like to run for office, can run for office without having to hustle money from millionaires or billionaires, we need to move toward public funding of elections. American democracy is not about corporations and billionaires being able to buy candidates and elections. It is not about Wall Street and big oil or the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson spending billions of dollars to help elect candidates who make the rich richer and everyone poorer. In my view, when we have a situation as we do today, where the media tells us that the Koch brothers alone, the second wealthiest family in America, will be spending in this election cycle more money than either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. When you have a situation like that, you are not looking at democracy, you are looking at oligarchy, and we cannot allow that to continue. When we think about what's going on in our country, and I touched on a number of issues, but let me touch on one that is so enormously important for the future of our country. And that is that in a highly competitive global economy, we need the best educated workforce we can create. Beyond comprehension to understand that in this great nation we have hundreds of thousands today, bright young men and women who are qualified, who have the intelligence, who have the drive to get a college degree, but they can't get into college because their families lack the money. Is equally crazy, and it is, that we have millions of young and middle-aged and not so middle-aged people who are shouldering horrendous debt because of the crime of going to college. Last year, at a meeting in Burlington, Vermont, and I met a young woman whose crime in life was that she wanted to go to medical school and practice primary care for low-income people in Vermont, which is exactly what we need. We have a real crisis in primary care in this country. She left medical school $300,000 in debt. A few weeks ago, I was here in Davie, and some young woman came up to me and said, $300,000 in debt. Well, let me tell you something. I just graduated dental school, and I'm going to be $400,000 in debt. Now, if we want to be competitive in the global economy, if we want to have the best educated population on earth, then we have to understand that 30 years ago, the United States had the highest percentage of college graduates of any major country on earth. Today, we are in 12th place. What we all have to understand is that 45 or 50 years ago, great public universities in our country, whether it was the University of California or the City University of New York, they were tuition free. What we have to understand is that in Germany, in Scandinavia, even in a country like Chile, not a very wealthy country, what those countries understand is that it is insane to tell young people that they cannot get the education that they need. That not only takes away the ladder of success for those young people, but it also is detrimental to the future economic well-being of this country. That is why I recently introduced legislation which does two things. Number one, it makes every public college and public university in America tuition free.
Yeah! Woo!
And second of all, it substantially reduces student debt.
Yeah.
What I want to do now is we have three young people up here who probably know something about this issue from a very personal point of view, right? And I've asked them to come, and I want them to say a few words about their experience with college, maybe graduate school financing.
Those are the three people sitting at the table
at Iowa State University studying political science.
to the left of the podium.
As the Senator said, my name is Meredith Cook, and I'm a senior at Iowa State University. When I graduate next May, I will be nearly $30,000 in student debt, simply because I dared to get an education. I was lucky enough to have my parents and scholarships pay for my first 2.5 years in school, but the money that was saved for me did not last. To pay for school, I was working 2 jobs, averaging about 40 hours a week, but it was not enough to pay for my living expenses, let alone begin to pay tuition. I took out student loans, and because of my parents' finances, I don't qualify for a lot of the federal loans, so I have several private loans, some of them carrying an interest rate close to 10 to 12%. When I graduate, I will have a massive debt burden that will affect all major decisions in my life. I will have to consider whether the jobs I take will be able to support me and my debt. I have to take into consideration where I choose to live if I will be able to pay off my debt. I've been dreaming of going to law school for several years now, but I will have to take a hard look at whether it will be worth going even deeper into debt and if the jobs that are available to me when I graduate will be able to pay my debt. Senator Sanders believes in free higher education is a right, and he has a plan to relieve the student debt burden. That's why I'm here with you today. Thank you.
Before I introduce the next student speaker, I want to pick up on a point that Meredith made, which again, we don't talk about very much. Meredith, do I understand that you're working at some point 40 hours a week when you go to college? This is true. All over the country, you are seeing students working sometimes during the night, incredible hours. I mean, it is just beyond comprehension to me, if we are serious about educating our young people, that we are forcing them to take so much time away from their studies. So Meredith, thank you for your struggle and thanks for being here. Let me now introduce John Ashton, who is a student at the Des Moines Area Community College studying religion. John?
As the Senator said, my name is John Ashton, and I go to the Des Moines Area Community College campus up in Ankeny, Iowa. I am also a licensed cosmetologist, a distinction that I paid $20,000 in student debt to achieve. While I was working as a cosmetologist, I was making minimum wage, $7.25 an hour, and struggled to pay those loans along with the other bills that accumulated. My current program has required more loans, which I will have to pay back when I graduate. These loans will follow me for life, all because I've decided to further my education. Thankfully, I'm eligible for the Pell Grant, which has allowed me to cover most of my education expenses this year. Without this program, higher education would be out of reach completely. However, more work needs to be done to expand education access for all Americans. I'm scared to consider the debt that I will face when I graduate, but when I see people like Senator Sanders fighting for access to higher education, I'm filled with hope for this country.
Jane Kirsch is a senior at Iowa State University studying political science. Jane.
Hi everyone, I'm Jane, and I come from a middle-class background, raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs and was able to receive Social Security survivor benefits in order to put my brother and I through school. Without these benefits and aid, I don't know where my family would have ended up. The student debt crisis is very important to me and my family and my fellow students. I attend a state university, but tuition here is still unaffordable for most students. I maintain good grades that allow me to receive many scholarships and grants, including the federal Pell Grant, and I have a job, but that is still not enough to cover my tuition or other living expenses. By the time I graduate next year, I will have incurred about $15,000 in debt. Every year I have had to work more hours, while my Pell Grant funding has decreased. Many low-income students rely on Pell Grants to stay in school, and some are left with no choice but to drop out when funding is cut. There was a time when Pell Grant awards could cover the cost of tuition, but that is no longer the case. Pell Grants are just one essential way that students of middle-class and low-income backgrounds are able to obtain a higher education. Senator Sanders supports expanding Pell Grant funding and ultimately free public higher education, which is why I'm here today. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. And the stories that they are telling not only reflect many, many thousands of young Iowans, but people all over this country. Let me touch on just a few more issues, then we're going to open it up for questions and comments. When we talk about our responsibility as human beings and as parents, and I've got 4 kids and 7 grandchildren, there is nothing more important than leaving our planet healthy and habitable for our kids and our grandchildren. is over. The scientific community has spoken in a virtually unanimous voice. Climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, and it is already causing devastating problems in the U.S. and around the world. What the scientists tell us is that we have a very limited opportunity, very limited, relatively small amount of time to transform our energy system away from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. And what they tell us is that if we do not do that, the planet that we're going to be leaving our kids and our grandchildren will be one that by the end of this century will be 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer, more flooding, more drought, more extreme weather disturbances, more acidification of the ocean, more national security issues as people throughout the world migrate in search of food and water. We have a moral responsibility to stand up now and say, enough is enough. We are going to transform our energy system and the planet we leave our
And we got to stop the back and pipeline.
Just show you for a second how climate change and that whole issue.
This is where the screen comes in.
There is, to my mind, I am perhaps the most progressive member of the United States Senate.
I think.
And I have a lot of disagreements with my Republican colleagues, needless to say, on many issues. But on this issue, there is something really scary. And that is, it is impossible to understand how you create good public policy if you reject science. That is exactly right. Let me tell you something else. It is not, my Republican colleagues do not reject the science of cancer. They don't reject the science of diabetes.
I think someone said gravity.
When you have big energy companies, and when you have the Koch brothers who make most of their money from fossil fuel, making it very clear that any Republican who stands up and is prepared to do something about climate change will probably have a primary opponent. That makes them very, very nervous. So that ties the loop in the sense of the power of big money and Citizens United even on this issue of climate change. Let me say a word about another issue that we should spend a lot of time talking about. Some of you may know and some of you may not know that the United States of America is the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. Modest gains of the Affordable Care Act, 35 million Americans continue to lack health insurance, and many more are underinsured. And yet, we end up spending almost twice as much per capita on health care as do the people of other nations. And our health care outcomes are not particularly good compared to the international community. Our life expectancy, our infant mortality rates are much worse than many other countries. In my view, what we have got to do as a nation is make it clear health care is a right of all people. And that we have got to go forward with a Medicare for all single payer.
few people in here happy. Woo!
I am the ranking member of the Senate Budget Committee. That means leader of the opposition representing the Democrats on that committee. I want to talk a little bit about what is going on in Washington. And that is that at a time when millions of Americans are struggling to keep their heads above water economically, at a time when senior poverty is increasing, at a time when millions of kids are living in dire poverty, my Republican colleagues are working overtime to make a bad situation even worse. If you can believe it, and I am the ranking member of the Budget Committee, I do know something about this. If you can believe it, the Republican budget passed last month throws 27 million Americans off of health insurance, makes drastic cuts in Medicare, throws millions of low-income Americans, including pregnant women, off of nutrition programs, and makes it harder for working-class families to afford college. You heard from these young people how the Pell Grant program benefits them. Republicans, over a 10-year period, cut Pell Grants by $90 billion. And then on top of all of that, to add insult to injury, the Republicans provided huge tax breaks, hundreds of billions of dollars over a 10-year period to the top 0.2%. It is shameful. Well, let me tell my Republican colleagues that I respectfully disagree. Instead of cutting Social Security, we need to expand Social Security benefits. Start and child care, as the Republican budget does, we need universal pre-K education. The struggle for equality in this country continues. And let me give you, I know what I've been saying sometimes gets a little depressing. My wife tells me to take it easy sometimes. But here's some good news, all right? And the good news is that we should be very proud that as a nation, over the last many, many years, that we have made significant progress in becoming a less discriminatory society. If we were sitting here in this room 40 years ago and somebody jumped up and said, you know, I think America is mature enough to overcome its racist history, and that say in the year 2008, we're going to elect an African American as President of the United States, re-elected 4 years later, nobody in that room would have thought that was possible, and that, of course, happened. We should be proud of that. Proud that as a country that we have made significant progress in combating sexism. That while sexism certainly still exists, we have opened up, opportunities have opened up for women that would have been unthinkable 30 or 40 years ago. Just tell you a brief story. When I was mayor of Burlington, we appointed the first police officer in the early 1980s, and what a big deal that was. And today, of course, we have women in combat, we have generals, we have women in every branch of our life. Do we need to make more progress? Absolutely.
Yes.
But we should be proud of what we have accomplished. I'll give you another example. And your state has played a role in this. 50, 60 years ago, when a family had a child with a disability, do you know what happened? That family was ashamed, embarrassed. As often as not, that child was institutionalized and nobody even knew about it. And as a result of the work of a lot of people, including your former Senator, Tom Harkin, the American Disabilities Act was passed in today all over America. And we take it for granted. This didn't go on forever. We have kids with serious disabilities in our classrooms. They are loved, they are protected, they are respected by their fellow students. So we've made real progress there. Last but not least, we should acknowledge the extraordinary progress we have made in terms of gay rights in this country. Nobody, 15 years ago, would have predicted that even in conservative states in this country, gay marriage is moving forward. And we should be proud of all of that. But having said that, we understand that many, many problems in these areas continue. And the front line of that struggle is the inner cities throughout our nation. From Ferguson to Baltimore and across this nation, too many African Americans and other minorities find themselves subjected to a system that treats citizens who have not committed crimes as if they were criminals. And that is unacceptable. If current trends continue, listen to this. This is horrendous. It is almost unspeakable. If we do not change the dynamics of this, a young African-American male born today stands a 1 in 3 chance of ending up in prison during his lifetime. This is an unspeakable tragedy, but this crisis of over-incarceration is not just a destruction of human life. It is also costly to our taxpayers who pay more than $70 billion a year for prison. To my mind, it makes a lot more sense to put money into education and jobs than more and more jails.
Standing up again.
There is something profoundly wrong when our country has more people behind bars than any other country on earth. China, as you all know, is a more authoritarian communist country. 3 times our size, more than 3 times. We have more people in jail than China does. Now, as a former mayor, I understand the importance of police-community relations. We worked very hard when I was mayor of Burlington to move to what we call community policing, where the police are part of the community. We need bold changes in the culture of law enforcement in this country. Change the culture. Lethal force should only be used in extreme measures. We do not want to see, we do not need to see police departments in this country looking like military occupiers. Someone who worked really hard with our police department, I can tell you that the vast majority of police officers are doing good jobs, and it's a really tough job. It is a very tough job. But when a police officer breaks the law, that police officer must be held accountable. Today, millions of decent, hard-working people live in America with no hope of gaining the status to live and work here legally. Many were brought here in their youth, and others came to find a life free of fear, free of oppression, war, or deprivation. We need a rational immigration process, not the Republican alternatives of self-deportation or some other draconian non-solution. We need a plan which provides a path to citizenship, and I agree with President Obama's idea to do through executive action what the Congress refuses to do through legislation. Let me conclude my remarks in the way I began. And that is to tell you, I wish I could tell you otherwise, but you know that it wouldn't be true. This country today faces enormous problems. I worry very much, as the father before, that your generation, if we do not turn these things around, will, for the first time in the modern history of this country, have a lower standard of living than your parents. Okay. I worry very much about perpetual warfare in the Mideast. Not addressing the crisis of climate change or having millions of people who can't get to a doctor or a nurse. But let me say this. What our opponents want, and what you see a whole lot of in the media, is for people to say, well, these problems are so monumental and the rich are so powerful, there's nothing you can do about it. Don't vote. Don't get involved in the political process. Don't start thinking about these issues. They're too hard. They're too overwhelming. Just don't get involved. And a lot of people have taken that bait. They've taken that bait, which is why, as I mentioned earlier, 63% of the people did not vote in the last election. What I beg of you, not for me, but for yourselves and your kids and your grandchildren, is to stand up and tell this billionaire class that we are going to take them on. That we are going that we can create a society in which every citizen has health care as a right, where every parent can have quality and affordable child care, and where all of our qualified young people, regardless of income, can go to college. We can create a nation where every senior can live in dignity and security and not be forced to choose between their medicine or their food. Where every veteran who defends this nation gets the quality health care and benefits they have earned. Of our nation become safer, and where people who want to succeed are treated fairly and given a helping hand. Where every person who dreams of becoming a citizen has a rational path forward, not just a dark corner to hide in. Where everyone, no matter their race, their religion, their disability, or their sexual orientation, realizes the full promise of equality that is our birthright as Americans. We are the wealthiest nation in the history of the world. We are Americans. There is nothing that, if we stand together, we cannot accomplish. Thank you very much.
signs, his campaign signs that they're holding up.
Karen, raise your hand. Karen has a mic. Karen has a mic. Phil, you have a mic. And Evan is...
I'm going to remain standing so I can capture the questioners.
Okay. Evan, why don't you start way up the balcony? You got somebody who wants to ask a question? I see a woman... yeah, that's fine.
Senator, I read someplace that every single senator believes that they can be president. Which do you think is better, to have a senator as president or a governor as president?
Well, obviously, I believe that senators have a unique perception of problems and so on. Look, it's not, there are governors who can be president, there are senators, there are mayors who can be president. The issue is not the position that you hold, it is what your vision is for the future, what your track record is, who you are prepared to stand with, and who you are prepared to take on. Somebody there? Okay, stand up, please.
Hi, my name is Justin, and I go to high school in Johnston, and I'm very concerned about climate change affecting my future. So my question to you is, what are your plans to combat climate change?
Well, thank you, Justin, for that very important question. Along with Senator Barbara Boxer of California, we introduced the most comprehensive legislation in the history of this country to combat climate change. And among other things, what we did and what has to be done is impose a tax on carbon. Yeah! What we also have to do, and what the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, is do a massive energy efficiency effort and weatherization effort in this country. My state, we've made some progress, but we still have a long way to go. There are buildings all over this country which are leaking energy through windows, roofs, doors, etc. We also need a transportation system which is energy efficient. That means not only making our cars and trucks much more energy efficient, but also building the kind of rail system that this country deserves.
Not to mention getting more hybrid buses and electric buses on the streets.
Senator, Iowa, if you talk about a lot about denying science, do you think it's also bad to deny the science on GMOs? And would you also consider billionaires like George Soros and Tom Steyer part of the cocky billionaire class? Thank you.
Two good questions. The first one deals with my view that we should have labels on GMO-produced foods in this country. The questioner suggests that this is anti-science. It's because you have scientists who say, look, GMOs are not causing any problems. And that may end up being the case. But you know what? I don't think we have enough information about that. I think it's too new a process. I don't know what that will look like in 40, 50, or 100 years. So all what we are saying is that just as when you go to a store, you know what is in the products that you buy, you know the calories that that chocolate bar has in it, that you should also know whether or not it contains GMO products. The questioner says, well, in so many words, aren't there Democrats who are billionaires? The answer is yes, there are. Are they contributing to the political campaigns of Democrats? The answer is yes, they are. But let me just make 2 points. First one, it is a false equivalence. The amount of money coming in from the Koch brothers, Sheldon Adelson, and other right-wing billionaires dwarfs anything coming in from wealthy Democrats. But, secondly, let me be very clear. As somebody who does not have a super PAC, who does not want a super PAC. I want all billionaire money out of politics. Somebody?
Senator Sanders, could you comment on this country's military spending and the Pentagon's endless war machine?
Yeah. War machine is right.
This country today spends more money on defense than the next 9 countries combined. And many of those countries, by the way, provide free college education for their kids. Second of all, and I've got an amendment that I have offered, I hope will be on the floor literally next week because we're dealing with the Defense Authorization Act. There is one agency in government that cannot sustain an independent audit, and that is the Department of Defense. Ha! So if you were to ask me or any member of the Congress, well, tell me how much money is being spent here and how much money is being spent there, we honestly could not tell you because the DoD is so complicated that they cannot even audit themselves. What I can tell you is there have been massive cost overruns.
Remember the $600 toilet seat from years back?
Contractor has
or the $200 hammer?
Of fraud in trying to rip off the government or reach very hefty settlements with the government for the same reason. Is ISIS a serious threat to this country? Yes, it is. Do we have to be bold and aggressive in addressing terrorism? Yes, we do. But let me say this. As somebody who voted against the war in Iraq, who led the effort against the war, going to do everything that I can to see that we are not involved in perpetual warfare in the Middle East. And I'll tell you how I think we do it. And this is tough stuff. And believe me, if I had some magical answer, I would be the first to tell you. I don't. This is very complicated and difficult stuff. But this is what I do believe. At the end of the day, what has got to happen in that region is the resolution that is going on right now, the fight over the soul of Islam. And that means that countries like Saudi Arabia, which has the 3rd largest military budget in the world, countries like Turkey, other countries in the region, they are going to have to get their hands dirty, and they are going to have to lead the effort against ISIS. Should be supportive of those efforts along with other countries. But why people believe that it is only the United States of America and our kids and our taxpayers who have to fight these wars is something I just don't understand and strongly disagree with.
As you know, the 40-year decline of the American middle class parallels exactly the 40-year decline of the American trade union movement. Is it realistic to expect that the middle class will have a resurgence without a comparable resurgence in the American trade union movement?
Thank you. That's a great question, and I absolutely agree with you. For at least 4 decades, there has been a war against trade unions in this country. And the reason is twofold. The obvious reason is that companies would prefer not to have to sit down and negotiate decent contracts with unions. But the other reason, which I think is actually more potent, is that corporate America understands that it is the union movement that has led the effort for every major piece of legislation in this country which protects working families. Break the union movement, who's going to be there to oppose them? Not much. So I believe, in fact, that and I say this to you as somebody who perhaps has the strongest voting record over the last 25 years for unions in this country, in the Congress. I believe we have to expand the trade union movement, and the way we do that is through card check-off legislation, which says that if 50% of the workers in an agency, in a union, plus one, sign a card saying they want to belong to a union, then you got a union by doing that.
Hello, Senator Sanders. Welcome to Des Moines again. My name is E.J. Wallace. I'm with an organization called Save the Children Action Network. We're mobilizing Iowans around expanding access to high-quality early childhood education programs here. So you talked a lot about the opportunity gap, making college more affordable, even mentioning childhood poverty rates. And we currently have 114,000 kids living at or below the poverty line here in Iowa. And even though quality early learning is one of the best ways to pull kids out of poverty, we have over half of every 3 and 4-year-old here in Iowa not enrolled in a preschool program, which means they start school behind their peers. So my question to you is, how have you in Vermont seen prioritizing quality early childhood education programs, and how do you specifically plan on expanding early childhood education as president?
Thank you. I'm sorry, your name again is?
E.J. Wallace.
E.J. touches on an issue which is so commonsensical. I mean, it just parallels the issue that these young people are talking about. Let's take a deep breath and look what's going on here. Millions of people, young people, who are bright, qualified, who want to get a college education, are struggling hard to do it. If you take a step back and you say, what sense does that make, that we are making it harder for people to help our economy? It is totally absurd. Equally important is the point that E.J. just raised. Every psychologist who studies the issue understands that the most important years of a human being's life are 0 to 4. And at this moment, when because of declining wages, we have so many women in the workforce, the option open to families is to send their kids to child care, which is often unaffordable and is often has not personnel that are as well trained as they should, and people who are underpaid. We have child care workers. We have child care workers who are making McDonald's wages. So here you have people who are working with kids in the most vulnerable years of their lives, when their emotions are developing, when their intellects are developing, and they are not getting the trained personnel they need to be working with. So clearly, E.J., in my view, we need a revolution in the way we do pre-K education in this country. We should learn from other countries. School, God didn't create school beginning at 6 years of age. And what we have got to understand, when so many people are in the workforce today, every child in this country should be entitled to quality pre-K. It is an expensive proposition, but it is more expensive not to do it.
Good evening, Senator Sanders. I'm just wondering, when the Senate voted on Fast Track, did they know at that time that they would be taking money out of Medicare And did they know about the letter from the Vietnamese labor leaders telling Congress not to pass it because of the slave labor wages and conditions in that country? Did they know that when they voted?
Like many other issues, those of us who wanted to know did know. And those who chose not to know chose not to know. And let me add to that.
That shows you where their priorities are.
I don't want to get into a whole long speech on the TPP. And I don't want to dwell on the fact that in Vietnam, the minimum wage that we will be competing against is 56 cents an hour. But a wonderful group, an heroic group called Doctors Without Borders, raised the issue that in this legislation, there were provisions that will enable drug companies to slow down the movement toward generics and force some of the poorest people in the world to pay prices for medicine that they could not afford. So there is a lot in that TPP above and beyond the unfairness to American workers. There are many, many reasons why that legislation should be opposed, and today was a good day in the fact that the House did the right thing. Let's take maybe two more questions. Yeah, let me go over to Phil Fremont.
Hi, my name is Phil Fremont. I've been with the senator for a long time. It was great to be in Iowa. I just wanted to mention to folks, up there you can see www.berniesanders.com. People, I'm sure, are wondering how you can get involved in the campaign. That is one way. Please go to our website. It's a good website. It's going to get better. We want to make it interactive. For those of you who have cell phones, please take your cell phone out now and just text a phone number. The number is simply 82623. 82623, and just write Bernie in that. You say, well, what's that going to do? That will give you updates. We'll let you know when Bernie's going to be back in Iowa and keep you abreast of all.
It is a text alert system, much like what I do when I text a number to check on the arrival time of a bus at a particular bus stop.
Tara, who's the other mic, is on board. And Tara, your email is tara@berniesanders.com.
It's Tara, TARATHOBE@berniesanders.com. It's Tara Toby@berniesanders.com.
And Evan Berger up here is Evan Berger.